In a quiet, picturesque town nestled in the heart of Vermont, the Crossman family was the epitome of the American dream until one fateful night in September 2023, when that dream turned into a chilling nightmare. What unfolded inside their home not only shocked the tight-knit community, but left the entire nation grappling with the question, what could drive someone to commit such unspeakable acts? In this chilling true crime documentary, we unravel the haunting details of the Crossman Family Massacre, a case so disturbing that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about evil. The Crossman family was well known and well liked in their small Vermont town. Mark Crossman, a respected local businessman, had built a successful hardware store that was a cornerstone of the community for over 2 decades. His wife, Laura, was a dedicated school teacher at the local elementary school, beloved by students and colleagues alike. They had 2 children, 17-year-old Ethan, a high school senior with aspirations to attend a prestigious college, and 14-year-old Lily, a talented dancer with dreams of performing on Broadway. To the outside world, the Crossmans appeared to be the perfect family. They lived in a beautiful, well-maintained home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the scenic beauty of Vermont's rolling hills and autumn foliage. Friends and neighbors often commented on how close-knit the family seemed. But as is often the case with such tragedies, what lay behind the closed doors of the Crossman household would remain hidden until it was too late. In the weeks leading up to the massacre, subtle signs of tension began to emerge within the family. Though no one could have anticipated the horrors that would soon follow, friends of Mark and Laura mentioned that Mark had been under immense stress due to financial issues at his store. Competition from larger chain retailers was threatening the family business, and Mark had taken on a significant amount of debt to try and stay afloat. Laura, meanwhile, confided in a colleague that her relationship with Mark had become strained, with frequent arguments about money and their children's future. Ethan, the eldest son, had his own struggles. Despite being a bright and promising student, he had recently begun to rebel against his parents. Friends at school noticed a change in his behavior. He became more withdrawn, skipping classes and getting into fights. Some speculated that Ethan's newfound aggression was a result of the pressure he felt to succeed academically, particularly from his father, but others whispered darker rumors, suggesting that Ethan had gotten involved with a bad crowd and was experimenting with drugs. Lily, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. A sweet, innocent teenager, she remained focused on her dancing, practicing for hours in the basement studio that Mark had built for her. But even she couldn't escape the growing tension in the household. In the days leading up to the massacre, Lily confided in a close friend that her parents' arguments had become more frequent and intense. September 14, 2023 began as a typical late summer evening in Vermont, but for the Crossman family, it would become a night of horror. The tension in the home had been building for weeks. After the family finished a quiet dinner, things quickly escalated. Ethan and Mark had a heated argument, something that had become more common recently. According to Laura's close friends, Ethan had been lashing out at his father due to the constant pressure to excel in school and life. The tension boiled over that evening, leading to Ethan storming out of the house around 8 p.m. Laura tried to restore calm, but the emotional atmosphere hung heavy over the family. Mark was visibly shaken, while Laura retreated upstairs to check on Lily, who had been practicing her dance routines. As the house fell into an eerie silence, Ethan eventually returned home. According to the investigation, it is believed that Ethan may have been followed by the killers, David Duke Frazier and Marcus Reed, as he returned. Around 10 p.m., the peace of the Vermont countryside was shattered by gunshots. Neighbors later reported hearing loud noises, but none thought to call the police. One neighbor, in particular, heard what she described as muffled shouting followed by loud bangs, but dismissed it as a family quarrel. Unfortunately, the police were not alerted until much later, when Laura failed to show up for work the next morning. Inside the Crossman home, the situation had rapidly spiraled into carnage. According to forensic reports, Frazier and Reed entered the house through an unlocked back door. They were there to confront Ethan about a large drug debt he had accumulated, but when they were met by Mark, the confrontation became violent. Mark was shot multiple times in the chest at close range, leaving him dead in the living room. Laura, hearing the gunshots, rushed downstairs only to be met with the same fate. She was shot twice, once in the shoulder and once fatally in the abdomen. Ethan was next. Having brought the danger into his home, he was caught in the crossfire. But unlike his parents, he tried to fight back. There was evidence of a struggle in Ethan's bedroom, where his body was eventually found. He had been shot in the head. The attackers were ruthless, leaving no loose ends, which led to the final and most chilling death of the night, Lily. The details surrounding Lily's murder were especially harrowing. Unlike the others, she was not shot. Lily had been strangled to death in her room, leading investigators to believe her murder was more personal. It's suspected that Frazier, in a cruel and calculated act, took it upon himself to ensure Lily couldn't survive as a witness. Her death sent shockwaves through the community. This innocent 14-year-old girl, who had likely heard the violence happening downstairs, was killed in a much more intimate and brutal manner. The psychological terror she must have endured in her final moments is one of the darkest elements of this tragedy. Upon entering the home, police were met with a chilling sight. In the living room, Mark and Laura were found brutally murdered. Both had been shot multiple times at close range. Investigators described the scene as particularly violent, suggesting that the killer had acted with rage and malice. Upstairs, the bodies of Ethan and Lily were discovered in their bedrooms. Ethan had also been shot, but Lily's death was even more disturbing. She had been strangled, a detail that suggested a personal element to the crime. As investigators pieced together the sequence of events, they were struck by the sheer brutality of the murders. This was not a random act of violence. It was a targeted, deliberate attack on an entire family. But who could have committed such a heinous crime, and why? The investigation into the Crossman Family Massacre began immediately, with local law enforcement working around the clock to find answers. At first, the police considered the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong, but as they delved deeper into the case, that theory quickly unraveled. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The Crossman family had been murdered, but the motive was unclear. Suspicion soon turned to Ethan. His recent behavioral changes and the argument he had with his father on the night of the murders made him an immediate person of interest. Investigators began looking into Ethan's life, interviewing his friends, classmates, and teachers. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Ethan had been struggling with anger issues for months and had become increasingly isolated. Some of his friends revealed that he had been experimenting with drugs and had even spoken about wanting to leave his family and start a new life. However, one crucial detail complicated the investigation. Ethan was dead. Could it be possible that Ethan had murdered his family and then turned the gun on himself? The theory was plausible, but something about it didn't sit right with the investigators. The manner in which Lily had been killed, strangled rather than shot, suggested a more personal motive, and the lack of gunpowder residue on Ethan's hands cast doubt on the idea of a murder-suicide. After the gruesome massacre, local law enforcement was under immense pressure to bring the culprits to justice. However, the investigation faced early setbacks, primarily due to the initial belief that the massacre may have been a tragic result of a family altercation that led Ethan to kill his family before turning the gun on himself. This theory, however, began to crumble as forensic evidence told a different story. The turning point in the investigation came when detectives stumbled upon Ethan's phone, which contained a string of cryptic text messages exchanged in the days leading up to the massacre. The messages revealed Ethan's growing involvement with local drug dealers, specifically David Duke Frazier and Marcus Reed. The texts were chilling, depicting Ethan in a desperate situation. He owed a significant amount of money, around $10,000, to Frazier, who was known for using violent means to settle debts. In one of the final messages, sent just hours before the massacre, Frazier issued a threatening ultimatum: "Tonight, you pay or you pay with blood." Armed with this new information, investigators began digging deeper into Ethan's connections. What they found was disturbing. Ethan, once a promising student, had been dealing with significant stress from his parents' expectations, which had pushed him into a dangerous circle. Frazier and Reed were low-level criminals who had been dealing drugs to high school students for years, operating just under the radar of local law enforcement. The breakthrough in the case came from an anonymous tip that pointed detectives directly to Frazier and Reed. The tipster claimed to have heard rumors in the local drug scene about a violent debt collection that had gone horribly wrong. This lead prompted police to place Frazier and Reed under surveillance. It wasn't long before they were arrested and brought in for questioning. Initially, both men denied any involvement, but the weight of the evidence against them, particularly the text messages and witness accounts of their whereabouts on the night of the murders, was overwhelming. During interrogation, Marcus Reed broke down first. He admitted that they had planned to confront Ethan about the money he owed, but claimed that things escalated beyond their control when Mark confronted them at the door. According to Reed, it was Frazier who pulled the trigger, killing Mark in cold blood. Laura, who had run down the stairs to see what was happening, was shot moments later. Reed claimed that he never intended for the confrontation to turn violent, but once the first shot was fired, there was no turning back. Reed's confession also provided insight into the murder of Lily, which remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Reed confessed that after the initial killings, Frazier was enraged that Lily had witnessed the murders. In a chillingly calculated move, Frazier strangled the young girl to death, ensuring that no one in the house would survive to tell the tale. Reed's confession not only shocked investigators, but also deepened the sense of horror surrounding the crime. David Frazier remained defiant throughout the investigation, showing no remorse for the lives he had taken. Even as Reed pointed the finger at him, Frazier refused to cooperate, maintaining his innocence until the very end. However, the mountain of evidence against him, combined with Reed's confession, was more than enough to secure convictions for both men. The discovery of Ethan's involvement with dangerous criminals and the realization that this horrific crime had stemmed from a spiraling debt sent shockwaves through the community. The Crossman family had been torn apart not by some external force, but by a toxic web of drug addiction, financial stress, and criminality that no one had seen coming. The arrest of David Duke Frazier and Marcus Reed came after weeks of relentless investigation, following up on numerous leads that eventually pointed law enforcement directly toward the two men. Initially, the police had no concrete suspects, and the small town of Northfield, Vermont, was gripped by fear and confusion. Who could have committed such a brutal act? As detectives pieced together the evidence, however, the focus began to shift away from the initial theory of a murder-suicide involving Ethan and towards something far more sinister. Once Ethan's phone messages were discovered, the investigation turned its attention to his recent interactions with local drug dealers. The tone of the text messages painted a bleak picture. Ethan had been deeply involved with Frazier and Reed, two low-level but notoriously violent criminals who had terrorized parts of the local community for years. Despite having a relatively small operation, the duo had a reputation for enforcing their debts with extreme violence, which now made them prime suspects in the Crossman Family Massacre. As investigators built their case, they interviewed numerous people in the town who had ties to Frazier and Reed. What emerged was a picture of two men who had long operated under the radar, running a small but profitable drug operation that targeted high school students and young adults. Ethan, a high-achieving student who had recently fallen under immense pressure from his family to succeed, had unfortunately become entangled in this dangerous world. His desperate need to escape led him to borrow large sums of money from Frazier to finance his drug habit, a decision that would ultimately cost him and his family their lives. Armed with the text messages and witness testimonies, police put both Frazier and Reed under close surveillance. They carefully monitored the two men's movements and began gathering more evidence to corroborate their suspicions. It was during this time that they received the anonymous tip, likely from someone within the drug scene, linking Frazier and Reed directly to the murders. The tipster claimed that the duo had gone to the Crossman home on the night of September 14, 2023, to collect on Ethan's debt. But things had spiraled out of control when Ethan's father, Mark Ice, intervened. Police now had enough probable cause to move forward with the arrests. On the morning of September 26, 2023, local authorities, with assistance from the Vermont State Police, conducted simultaneous raids on the homes of Frazier and Reed. The two men were arrested without incident, though Frazier reportedly showed little emotion as he was taken into custody, while Reed appeared visibly shaken. Once in custody, the two suspects were separated and questioned at length. From the outset, both men denied any involvement in the murders. Frazier, who had been in and out of the justice system for most of his adult life, was particularly uncooperative. He refused to answer any questions beyond the basic, continually asserting his innocence and acting as though the charges were beneath him. Despite his silence, detectives remained confident they had enough evidence to tie him to the crime. Reed, on the other hand, began to crack under the pressure. He had a much lighter criminal record compared to Frazier, and it became apparent early on that he was the weaker link in the duo. After hours of questioning, Reed's story began to change. Initially, he tried to distance himself from the murders, claiming he had no idea what had happened inside the Crossman home. But as the detectives continued to push, showing him the text messages between Ethan and Frazier, Reed's composure crumbled. Eventually, Reed broke down and confessed. His account of the events that night was both chilling and heartbreaking. He admitted that they had gone to the Crossman home with the intent of scaring Ethan into paying the money he owed. But when Mark confronted them at the door, Frazier lost control and pulled out a gun. According to Reed, Mark's resistance infuriated Frazier, and in a fit of rage, he shot Mark multiple times. Laura was the next to die, as she rushed downstairs to see what was happening. In the chaos, Frazier turned his gun on Ethan, killing him in his bedroom after a brief struggle. Reed's most disturbing revelation, however, was about Lily. According to Reed, Lily had been upstairs in her room during the initial confrontation. After the gunshots, she must have hidden, terrified of the violence unfolding below. But Frazier, now fully committed to eliminating any witnesses, sought her out. Reed described how Frazier strangled the young girl in her room, ensuring that no one in the Crossman family would survive the night. Reed claimed that he had no part in Lily's murder, but admitted to helping Frazier flee the scene afterward. Even with Reed's full confession implicating him as the mastermind behind the massacre, Frazier refused to cooperate. He denied any involvement in the crime, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Detectives knew that Reed's confession, along with the forensic evidence linking them to the scene, would be enough to secure a conviction. But Frazier's cold, calculated demeanor during the interrogations left investigators with a chilling impression of his character. Throughout the entire process, Frazier showed no remorse, no emotion, and no concern for the lives he had taken. Reed's cooperation did little to reduce his sentence, but it painted a clear picture of Frazier's ruthlessness. Frazier was ultimately charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, including the premeditated murder of Lily Reed, although given a lesser sentence due to his cooperation, still faced life in prison for his role in the deaths of Mark, Laura, and Ethan. The arrest and eventual conviction of David Frazier and Marcus Reed brought a sense of closure to the town of Northfield, but the scars of the tragedy remain. The Crossman family, once a symbol of hope and success in the community, had been torn apart by violence, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. In the months that followed, the town held vigils and memorials for the family, honoring their memory and mourning the loss of such promising lives. But the question of why still lingers in the minds of many. How could a family so seemingly perfect, living in such a peaceful town, fall victim to such senseless violence? The Crossman Family Massacre serves as a haunting reminder that evil can lurk in even the most unsuspecting places. As we delve into the details of this tragic case, we are left with a chilling realization. Sometimes the darkest horrors are found not in the shadows, but in the people we think we know.